So, yeah. If you haven't gotten a UW cookie, see Mary, and she's got one for you. Thanks, Mary. Tonight we have Mark Pauli from the Wisconsin DNR, and he will be speaking about PFAS. Mark Pauli is the Northern Region Drinking Water and Groundwater Program Supervisor, working out of the State Forestry Headquarters in Rhinelander. His team oversees and enforces Safe Drinking Water Act requirements at over 2,700 public water systems across 18 counties. He joined the department in September of 2010. During his tenure, he served on the Northern Region Integrated Leadership Team, the Remediation and Redevelopment Regional Peer Review Group, and the Environmental Performance Area Support Team. Prior to joining the department, Mark worked for an environmental consulting firm in Madison for 24 years as an analytical chemist, hydrogeologist, and technical manager. Work was conducted in numerous states and on 3 different continents. Mark holds a Bachelor of Science in Water Resources Management with an emphasis of water chemistry from UW-Stevens Point, and a master's degree in Water Resources Management with an emphasis on hydrogeology from the Institute of Environmental Studies at UW-Madison. He's also a licensed professional geologist in the state of Wisconsin, and Mark currently resides in Irma, and during his off time, he likes to explore the outdoors, woodwork, and fish. So, per our tradition, we have some trivia about Mark. While Mark spent many years in the southern part of the state during his professional career in Madison, he's actually a local to the North Woods. And as a youngster, he was the last of the last 5th grade class to attend a 3-room schoolhouse before it closed in 1973. This schoolhouse was built in 1914, and another wing was added in 1924. The school housed kindergarten through 8th grade until the time of its closing in 1973. So, who knows their local history based on those facts? In what small town does this schoolhouse exist? A, Sainer, B, Conover, or C, Hazelhurst? Ooh, we got some smart people tonight. Indeed it was Sainer, Wisconsin. Now Mark Pauli.
All right. Okay, so not unmuted yet, right? Hello. Okay. Did I turn it off somehow?
Nope, that's on.
How about now? There we go. Put this in the pocket so we can have it at hand. Thank you very much for having me here today. This is an honor. I recognize some familiar faces in the crowd, so thank you for coming out to see me. I'm going to mention one of those. First off, Mr. Tom Giroux is sitting in the front seat. He's the person that's responsible for hiring me into the DNR, and so it was a great opportunity. I love my job. So today we're here to just try to give a common overview about PFAS. Just a little bit about, you heard that I was an organic chemist, so I've been working in the emergent contaminant field for a long time. Actually, when I was in consultant, I was a contaminant fate and transport hydrogeologist. And recently now I've been the lead for the PFAS situation in the town of Starks or town of Stella. So I've been immersed in PFAS for the last 2 years, but it's not something new to me. Organic chemistry is something that I've pursued all my career, which I'm going on 39 years now. So PFAS was discovered, actually I shouldn't say it was discovered, it was an accidental laboratory procedure by Roy J. Plunkett in 1938. He was doing some fluoride chemistry experiments, and overnight he had a beaker that he was hoping he was going to get a liquid compound, and it ended up being a dry powder. But once he started playing with that, he saw that it had these really unusual properties compared to most compounds. And so the very first accidental discovery was polyfluoryl tetraethylene, or PFTE, or most folks might know it as Teflon. So if you're a plumber, or you have other, you can tell its properties for Teflon. It's resistant to water, it's resistant to oil, it's resistant to staining. And that's the big characteristics of PFAS. So once they discovered that, I think one of the very first uses was by the military, and it was used to put out jet fuel and diesel fuel fires. And so PFAS is in a class of compounds that we call surfactants, or at least some of them. I should point out that there's a discrepancy in the total amount of that there are, but there's between 5 to 10,000 different PFAS chemicals. And they played with the chemistry of them throughout the years. The initial PFAS chemical compounds are rather rudimentary, but as they advanced, they became much more complex in nature. So the aqueous firefighting foam, the PFAS, would help with taking out one of the legs of the fire triangle. By this surfactant would smother it out and take out the oxygen so that the fire couldn't continue. And if you know anything about aviation fuel or jet fuel, it's an extremely volatile chemical. And so they had to deal with that on aircraft carriers and at airports, et cetera. Unfortunately, that then worked its way into the private or into the citizens' transportation community, and it got dispersed to many airports throughout the country. And some of the reasons that we see PFAS in drinking water supplies now are from the exercising of firefighting equipment, which is actually a FAA requirement to make sure that they actually can put out the fire, but then they produce a waste. And there was no directions in FAA exercises of what to do with this, and so some of that was released to the environment or was put into sanitary sewers, which ends up going to a wastewater treatment facility that was not designed to remove that PFAS, which then gets discharged to the waterway. So you can see that PFAS has a cycle, and one of the things we need to try to figure out is how can we break that cycle, so from production to disposal to dispersant in the environment. After that, they learned some more other characteristics of PFAS. In particular, they're heat resistant, so it takes over 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit to start destroying PFAS. As I had said before, they're water resistant, they're stain and oil resistant. And so Mr. Tom Giroux taught me something a couple years ago at Nicolet College during a Earth Day talk, and that is that, we all are responsible for this PFAS situation. And the reason I say that is, and I want to say that when I heard Tom say that, I raised my eyebrows and my eyes and said, whoop, you're blaming me for this? But if you think about it, one of the things I like to do is camp. And you put your fly up and it's raining, and pretty soon you're getting dripping through, and boy, that can of camp dry. I'm going to tell you, that was some really good stuff. It really helped you from having that water in your tent at night. You could actually sleep. Your bag wasn't getting wet. It was fantastic. And all of a sudden, I could spray the stuff on my boots. And I wasn't getting, I remember me and my kids, or me and my siblings fighting over the bread bags. I know some of the older folks are going to catch on to that. Some of the younger folks aren't going to catch on to that. But the problem is that when you had your boots, they weren't rubber. They were leather, and they had felt liners. And when you went out to play, you got wet feet. And so you fought your brothers and sisters to get the bread bag because you didn't get wet feet, and you could stay outside longer because you weren't cold. And by the way, I do want to comment, I should have when I started. Thank you so much for being out here today. Wow, this is like wicked weather. I mean, it's incredible. And so, they put Gore-Tex. They created Gore-Tex and put that in boots, and they can line boots with it. And just imagine that. You can walk out in the water. You don't have to worry about it. So there's all these different. Well, then you went to the drive-in and you decided that you're going to have your cheeseburger, or you went to the pizza place and you wanted to have your pizza, or the pizza delivery came, but that damn cheese stuck to the top of the lid of that pizza box. So what do? Well, you line it with a PFAS polymer, and then it won't stick to the top, and then you actually get your cheese from your pizza, right? Or you went to McDonald's and you wanted your McBurger or your breakfast sandwich, and half of your cheese stuck to that wrapper. Well, if you line a wrapper with PFAS, it won't allow, first off, the oil to penetrate through it, so you're not getting a big mess in your bag, but not only that, your food didn't stick to your wrapper, and you got your actual food. So we started applying it to many different applications, and there are some residential things, so just not industrial uses. When Grandma used to come over to my mom's house and she would be wearing her scarlet red lipstick, I remember my mom saying, boy, this is going to take me forever to get this off these coffee cups. Well, it was interesting. If you put PFAS into the coffee cup, guess what? It doesn't stain the coffee cup anymore. So they put it in lipstick. They put it in mascara. It's in non-stick cookware. So that, when they drop that red wine glass onto your white carpet and it doesn't stain it, it's because it was lined with PFAS to keep that from staining it. Or you go out into your car tonight and you ate out at the Chinese restaurant and you left your box and you go to pick it up and you had so much food in the box that it breaks and it goes onto your car seat. Well, it's not going to stain that because the interior of your car has been sprayed with PFAS polymer to keep it from staining. So you can just see that it was used in a lot of products, and it was because us as consumers said, I don't want to have to spend a half a day trying to clean the wine out of my carpet. I don't want to have cold feet and end up getting cold. So we as consumers kind of told those people that were in industry that we have a demand for this particular products. And so from the 60s on up through about 2000 when we banned the production of PFAS in the United States. But the problem is that we have not banned the importation of PFAS-containing materials, and that would be something that we'll talk about in a second here. So I'm not a health expert. I would say that if you want to learn anything or know anything about the health effects of PFAS, you should go on to the DHS, Department of Health Services website. I can say that PFAS, we have concerns about it because the more information that we gain, we find out and I think that's evidenced by the federal government, the EPA lowering the health standard continually. Back in the early 2000s, there was really a health standard was kind of about 200, but that wasn't the real health standard. And then in 2018, late, they brought that down to 70 parts per trillion. And then within the last 2 or 3 years, for PFOA in particular, for the health advisory, it's 4 parts per quadrillion. If you remember your scientific notation, that's 10 to the minus 15th. That's a lot of zeros. And really what that's trying to say is that really you should have no PFAS exposure. It's just like lead. The information that we're gaining from health effects says is that you shouldn't really have any PFAS exposure. And so there's ways that you can mitigate or reduce your PFAS exposure. We'll talk about that a little bit. Some of those health effects are just like immunosuppression for vaccines. There are some links to cancer. It was back in, I can't remember the exact date, there was a farmer that was in West Virginia that was down gradient of a production facility from 3M. That's when the first effects of PFAS were kind of noticed. The gentleman had a 200 head of cattle, and by the end of his journey with it, he had lost over 150 of those cattle. And that created what we call the C8 study, in which production workers were looked at for looking at the potential health effects, and that's where a lot of the studies come from. And now they're finding more and more, and more that we learn about it, the more effects that we have. I think one of the big things is that people should realize is that when we talk about PFAS, these are at parts per trillion levels or nanograms per liter. So if you talk about milligrams per liter, somebody might understand parts per million. This is 10 to the 6th lower. So 10 to the minus 12th, if you want scientific notation, these are very low concentrations. But the problem is that your hormones in your body work at this, so it can act as an endocrine disruptor as well. Some of these compounds can as well. So that means what your hormones are working in your body, these can take the place of those in your endocrine system and cause some health effects that way too. And then you also have immunogenic effects potentially, and that's why you have the health standard at such low, is that you got to protect all of the population, and fetal would be one of those that you could have a one-time acute toxic effect. The other problem with PFAS is its environmental persistence. So the thing about these PFAS compounds is that they're really good at being heat resistant and soil stain resistant, but the fact of the matter is that they're so good at it that they don't break down. That's why they're so good at it. And one of the reasons that they're not readily broke down is that the carbon fluoride bond that makes up the body of the PFAS molecules is the strongest bond in nature. And so there is no organism out there without having some type of amendment that will expend energy to try to break this bond, to break down PFAS, because it's not sustainable for them. If they put out more energy than they can drive, it's not sustainable. So in bench studies and in column studies in laboratories, they can put bacteria in columns and put PFAS in and get it to break down some PFAS. But they're amending that. That means that they're giving it nutrients and to allow the bacterial to follow. There's some evidence that there might be some low amount of fungus degradation, and now there is showing that there might be some slight amount of aquifer retardation with certain types of PFAS. But for the most part, when it's applied or put into the environment, it's persistent and it will stay. And then the other thing is that they're really difficult to remediate. So because these things are so good at what they do, for instance, their heat resistance, they have to be raising temperature greater than 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit to start destructing them. So you can imagine that if we were going to use incineration, how much energy would be used. So the thing is, we've got to find some type of full-scale remediation that is economically feasible. I think that there's a lot of people that are working on it. I'm not too worried about it personally, and the reason I say that is because there is a lot of money to be made in someone that can figure out how to remediate PFAS. And so believe me, there's a lot of work that's going on, because if you can be the person to put that patent on it, you're going to make a lot of money. You're going to make a lot of money. Because the thing about this is it's ubiquitous. That word means is that it's just about everywhere in the environment. Just about everywhere that we can sample, we can find low levels of PFAS. Air deposition, it's in water, soil deposition. We find it in Lake Superior, so there's a rainbow smelt fish advisory because of airborne deposition into Lake Superior. I find that very concerning to me, because Gitchagumi is one of our best gifts here in Wisconsin. Okay, so PFAS, how do we consider it to be an emergent contaminant? R.T. Kruger is here today, who's the owner of Northern Lake Service, who we work closely with. He works with the federal government on a rule that's called the Uncontaminated Monitoring Rule. And what the federal government does is that we look at what kind of contaminants are up and rising and what could be their potential persistence within the environment. And so they pick a maximum of 20 compounds every 5 years and then start sampling public water systems to see what their persistence was. And in 2013, Rhinelander Wells 7 had PFAS that was detected as part of that UCMR. We are on UCMR 5 now, and there are PFAS compounds that are part of that UCMR process. So we continue to look at the regulation and persistence of PFAS. Again, the health advisory level for PFOA has gone down to 4 parts per quadrillion. Currently, the federal government has passed in April of 2024, they finalized the federal drinking water standards for PFOA and PFAS and 4 other compounds with a hazardous index calculation at 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFAS. Currently, for soil, from a federal standpoint, there are no soil standards that have been put forth by the federal government, and they are looking to pursue the designation of PFAS as a hazardous substance under CERCLA. In the state of Wisconsin, we, in February of 2022, presented to the board our rulemaking process for an MCL for public water systems of 20 parts per trillion, which was the DHS recommendation. Because the health standard was 70 at that time, the NRB changed that to 70 parts per trillion. So currently we do have a public water system MCL maximum contaminant level of 70 parts per trillion combined for PFOA, PFAS. Fortunately, with the April 24 finalizing of the federal MCL, the DNR has currently now opened up the scope for 809 as of August 2024 to promulgate the federal standards as our public drinking water standards. From a groundwater standpoint in private wells, there currently is no federal or a private groundwater standard. It was interesting to see that on February 4th here, Tuesday, the governor announced the opening of a new scope statement for PFAS standards for groundwater, which will include 6 PFAS that are included in the federal MCL. In the state of Wisconsin, there currently is no numeric standards. The state of Wisconsin currently pursues it as a hazardous substance under Wisconsin Statute 292, or what we call the spills law. And with that, that's pretty much an overview that I've got on PFAS and what the conditions are. Am I pretty close to my 15?
All right. We're going to open up the floor to questions. Amber has a mic, so raise your hand and she'll come find you. But wait for that mic to come to you so our audience online and everybody in the room can hear you.
Hello. Wow, this is just one of those topics that there's so much talk and so much confusion and not a lot of definite information for the public to understand. So you said something about various problems with these compounds becoming immunosuppressants, endocrine disruptors, and maybe mutagens. Have there been any studies done to show that these things are happening in animals? I mean, I don't assume it's gotten to the human level yet, but any studies that are pointing out what is happening with PFAS exposure in creatures?
Yeah. I'm not an expert. I can't speak for that. I would tell you that you should contact the DHS in regards to health effects and what they're doing to determine that. I know that the C8 study that I discussed was one of the first, and that really brought that to attention. And I do know that DHS is working on some other work within the state of Wisconsin, but I'm not versed on what that is. But yes, the answer is yes, they are looking at health effects, and that's why they can support. So when we put forth an administrative rule to put standards, we actually get the recommendation from DHS. So the DNR does not have toxicologists that would look at that type of information. While we have toxicologists, they're a little bit different. And so DHS, they give us the recommendations, and that's what we bring forth to create the administrative rule.
Thank you very much, and thank you for shedding light. I piggyback on everything she said at how we keep hearing about it. My question really is just a curiosity on focusing on the research or putting some investments in cleaning up and bioremediation. And you mentioned briefly fungi. A lot of other countries have already recognized this and been able to apply bioremediation, mycoremediation to PFAS along with other toxic substances. Is there anything, I did hear of in Marathon County, the waste management received a grant for PFAS and I think lead, and we're able to partner with Sigorna and Sons, a mushroom company, that they were able to grow this mycelium, the mushroom's web, and we're able to put this mushrooms in the contaminated soil, and we're able to show like an amazing product that completely made the soil inert and not dangerous. So wondering if there's anything that's applied. Is there any other studies that you can tell us about, or any other projects in the state of Wisconsin, specifically in the northern Wisconsin for PFAS?
I can't say specific to Wisconsin or northern Wisconsin, but one of the great studies that I've been reading about is the U.S. Forest Service production of biochar. So when we have waste product wood, like from spruce beetle, death, etc., there's only a certain period of time in which that wood is viable for commercial use. Once it's past that point, the U.S. Forest has been working on the production of biochar, which basically is essentially granulated activated charcoal, or GAC, if you want to put it, or charcoal, which has an affinity for organic compounds. The state of Maine has been doing, they're really ahead of most states in experimentation and looking at remediation, et cetera. I haven't heard anything that you talked about, but the problem, again, that I would go to is that can we make that economically feasible on a large scale? That's the problem. We have so many PFAS problems that we're going to have to find a remediation that's going to be somewhat cost effective, because it's going to have to be on a very large scale. So I think that that's promising. The biochar, though, acts as a binding agent, so it's not a living organism like a mycelium that you're talking about that might be able to start breaking that down. I can say, though, be careful for breakdown products. You never know what their toxicity can be. So we have parent products, and then the breakdown products are called daughter products, and a lot of times daughter products can be as toxic or more toxic. So you got to be a little careful about how you approach it.
My understanding is there's like 3 phases on we're talking about with this. I don't know if it's just Teflon or what, but I know there's like people talk about when it's heated above like 500, it becomes like an aerial toxin that kills off the canaries in the house, like when you're cooking too much. I'm also wondering if it's below that, what is the danger? What would you say, like if it's not to the 500 degrees, what is the toxicity? And then you also mentioned 1200 degrees as like an incineration point, and do you know what happens beyond that point?
Well, the problem is that you got to maintain the heat at 1200 degrees, and you get inconsistent heating, so then you get indestructive of the parent compound, and you're getting partial release of compounds, so it's kind of touchy. I've only heard a little bit about the pan and about overheating and getting that in an indoor air environment. And I haven't heard the 500 before. What I would tell you is get rid of your nonstick pan. I think, one of the great choices is, good old cast iron pan that you've seasoned properly. That's like number one, right? So that's the thing about that. There's ways that we can reduce your PFAS exposure. The DHS has a really good information on their website about reducing PFAS exposure. Again, I'm going to give a little credit to Mr. Tomdro, who taught me that night. We can also help as consumers. So our governments have been a little slow, in my opinion, to reacting to the whole PFAS situation. But as consumers, we control what we buy. So as I talked earlier, we bought these products because we really liked their characteristics and what they could do for us. But we understand what they're doing to us now. And so, I went on a website today just to find the information, just kind of so I could talk about it today. And it went on PFAS Alternative. And there was a website that had 546 different choices of different commercial or industrial products that you would go and buy that are PFAS free. So that's what I would tell you is that if you got a nonstick pan and you're worried about exposure, get rid of it. If you're just one moment. If you're wearing cosmetics and you know that they have PFAS in it, get rid of it. Don't put stain resistant on your carpet or in the interior of your car. I think one of the other big things that needs to be talked about is not only drinking water is a problem for PFAS exposure, but consumption of food that contains PFAS. And one of those big things is fish advisories. And so if you go onto the DNR, they're posted, choose wisely is what the DNR's webpage is for that. And it's to make sure, look at, if you're consuming wild game, fish, etc., you should be understanding how much you're consuming and getting an idea what that exposure rate is. Fish is one of those that really can give you a good whop for PFAS compared to one drink of water. Fish dinner can be equivalent to about 25 times exposure of drinking water. And so, not just drinking water; it's in your foods, and it's in our food cycle. There's no doubt that there's PFAS that ends up in our food cycle. And then also, just like I said, if you're going to go to the fast food joint, maybe don't go there because they got a PFAS wrapper. Think about eating somewhere else and eating something different. So, just reducing your PFAS footprint. The consumerist, the products that you buy, and what you have in your house. When the study, we did that for the prevalence of PFAS in the state of Wisconsin, 71% of all private wells had detectable levels of PFAS.
I was wondering if you could give us a little information on how the PFAS are affecting the other aquatic organisms, amphibians, fish, mammals, with their reproduction.
Unfortunately, I have no expertise in aquatic ecosystems and PFAS. I'm very sorry.
So you've given a lot of examples of things that we should get rid of. I would like you to bring it closer to my kitchen. After the, the Teflon pot, what are the next 4 things in my kitchen that I should get rid of?
Wow, that's a great question. I would say, and these are just right off the top of my head, if you got some type of, if it's a wax paper or something that you're wrapping to put in a freezer, kind of see if they've got some type of polymer that would be on that. What is the food that you're consuming? Where did it come from? Where was it derived from?
Microwave popcorn.
So, microwavable popcorn bags were lined with PFAS polymer so that the oil didn't saturate through the bag when you put it into the microwave. There's also another threat with microwavable popcorn I'll talk about for a second, and that's called the buttering flavor, and it's called diacetyl. And it causes absolute respiratory problems. There's been people that have passed away from taking that hit off of that microwavable popcorn bag when it comes out of the microwave. So it's not just PFAS, I'm sorry to say. So yep, it was put in microwavable popcorn bags to keep the oil from penetrating through the bag.
I assume that as far as comparing our research with what is happening internationally, like what's the other research that's going on around the world about the PFAS?
Yeah, so we're way behind. So the Northern Europeans and the Europeans, and they're way ahead of this. They banned a long time ago. They've done tons of research. They've thrown money at it. They're way ahead of us. We've been slow, and I think that's it's because it's all over. It's a big dollar. I think one of the biggest concerns for the federal government is that almost every. So I can speak for this. So when I was in private sector, I was a military contractor. So I worked in 2 continents in 23 states in 24 years, almost all on live Air Force or SAC bases or base realignment closure bases. And every single one of them exercised aqueous firefighting foam. The real thing, the real McCoy. No fuselage with propane. They started accelerant fires with JP and they trained putting them out. And so every single military base is going to have this problem if they've exercised aqueous firefighting foam, in particular if they're air-based. So yes, there's been a lot of research, and we need to pay attention to that. That's really the answer to that, is learn from that and grow from that.
Right here. To bring it back to being a little more localized and not in the kitchen, you, as a district employee of the Department of Natural Resources, and what we know about fish contamination in Lake Wausau and the Stevens Point flowage, and your very fact that you said it's a paper product that we use for non-sticking, where we have paper mills here in Wisconsin that create those products, right?
Correct.
Okay, so what role did they play in the contamination of our groundwater on land spreading and discharge to the river over 50 years?
Yeah, that's going to have to be yet to be determined. We're just in the infancy of collecting samples in the environment in the last 3, 4, 5 years, and we need support to be able to do that. So there's been money that's been placed in budgets that weren't allocated, and so we need support with that.
But we know that land spreading, that for phosphorus and nitrogen reduction in these paper mills and WVIC actually contaminated areas where we have the highest concentration in PFAS in Oneida County. So thinking locally, I want to look for solutions. I'm worried about, we have no groundwater standards for private wells. So us living in the North Woods that have our own septic systems that wash clothes made of Gore-Tex, which is the main product so fishermen can stay cool when rain doesn't get through our tent, when we wash our clothes, are not PFAS going into our septic systems and into our ground?
Yes. So
Can you comment,
in
please?
February 2022, the Department of Natural Resources brought 3 things to the Natural Resources Board after they had gone through an administrative rule process. That was to gain surface water standards for PFOA, PFAS. That was passed by the board, 95 and 8 for PFOA and PFAS respectively. We then passed the MCL for federal drinking water, like I had indicated that we went for 20 and it was passed to 70. But yes, the groundwater standard was denied because of the the economic impact analysis was too close to the RAINS Act ceiling of $10 million over 2 years to the regulated community. So the Natural Resources Board asked us get a little better idea of prevalence. And so a gentleman named Matt Silver, who is an emerging contaminant researcher with the department who now is working in New Zealand, designed a study. And it was enacted in the summer of 2022 in the state of Wisconsin. And to get an idea of prevalence, the state was carved up into 450 equal quadrants of approximately 125 square miles each. And one well was sampled in each one of those quadrants. And 71% of the private wells that were detected at that time had detectable levels of PFAS. And likely the main contributor are privately owned on-site wastewater treatment systems, meaning that they're buying products that they're using recreationally or industrial products that they're using at house. And our privately owned wastewater treatment systems are not designed to remove PFAS. And so it's just a straight through situation. It's used in the house, it's going to go straight back out. And so the results of that study indicated that if you're going to have PFAS in your well, you're likely going to be living in an urban area. But if you're going to have grossly impacted private wells, you're going to be in a rural area adjacent to agricultural land.
We have a lot of online questions tonight, so I'm going to read a couple before we move on to some audience questions. Are there any measures of the PFAS levels in local lakes, and what can that do to the game fish populations?
That's a great question. So there is quite a bit of data that's open to the public. So any PFAS sampling that the DNR does, we're open and transparent with that. So if you go onto the DNR website and you put in PFAS, you'll get a series of links that will come up, and there's a PFAS interactive viewer. So any PFAS samples that have been collected in the state of Wisconsin are on that PFAS viewer, and you can just simply zoom into the area of the state to determine if you have PFAS samples in your area and what those are, if they're private well samples, if they're surface water samples. So yes, what we're finding is we're kind of using surface water as a precursor to determine where we might have some issues, and so they've done quite a bit of surface water sampling throughout the state to kind of find where we might have potential hotspots.
Thank you. One more here. The Pine Lake landfill was used to dispose of Rhinelander paper mill waste. Last March, its leachate, I don't know if that's the right word, tested 12,000 parts per million of PFOA. In June, Patrick Gorski published surface water results showing a PFOA hotspot at Jewel Creek. Several fields near the creek have had paper mill waste spread. So the question, what plans does DNR have to test the nearby private wells?
So we currently are offering free private well testing in a 3-mile radius of the town of Stella, and I also have included a small amount just on the west side of that 3-mile and the north side of sea by Sunset Lake. Snowden is the highest surface water detected in the state of Wisconsin, and Sunset was second. So as we find more PFAS, we'll be looking at doing more sampling. What we need, though, is the money to get released to be able to pay for the analysis. And so the sampling that's occurred out in Stella has been program dollars out of the DG program, the Drinking Water and groundwater program, who I work for, we had to prioritize our work so that we could use our dollars that were allocated for seeking public water systems and protecting private wells to do that sampling. I have results for 225 wells so far in the town of Stella.
Wow. One more question here before we keep going. You mentioned that PFAS are still allowed to be imported into the U.S. What are these imports being used for? And are there any plans to ban these imports?
Boy, I sure wish in 2000, when they banned the production of PFAS in the United States, they would have banned the importation of it. So any production of PFAS that can be used even in an industrial process can be imported. So that doesn't mean that we've stopped the PFAS. And so that's just one of those things that's going to have to occur, that we're going to have to understand, is that we're, as a nation, we've got to reduce our PFAS footprint, and we're going to have to reduce the use of this. I will comment, though, that PFAS they're amazing. I mean, for what they do, they're amazing. And there are some uses that we call essential uses. So, for instance, in some medical applications, there are nothing else that PFAS can do, for instance, in transplants for hearts and some other uses in medical. So I'm not saying that we're never, ever going to be using PFAS, but we really need to extremely reduce the use and only use it for what is essential. I know there's some like aviation uses, et cetera, but we have imported it for everything. I mean, you look again at carpet and upholstery and you name it, it's in everything. I'm sure we had, this is one thing I was going to mention. How many cross-country skiers do we have? Here. Better look at your wax, because about 90% of them contain PFAS. So you're a spreader.
The front page of the Journal Sentinel yesterday had a headline that Tony Evers did something about PFAS. Maybe everyone knows what it is, but I don't. Could you fill me in?
Well, there was a lot of things that went down, so I won't be able to fill you in on everything. I can tell you from a drinking water standpoint, what's most important, I mentioned it earlier in this, is that we did receive the new health advisory. The DNR, we asked the DHS to provide us the new health advisory. They provided that to us, and now the governor has provided the approval to open the scope statement to now finally go through an administrative rule process again to try to get standards for private wells. And so that was one of the big things. He's got, there's a lot of things. It was really interesting. I did see he's going to put like $7 million to look at potential destructive technologies. So again, we were talking about how can you destroy these? Like, for instance, if you have a treatment system in your house, it's going to remove the PFAS from the water, but that filter is going to bind it. And what do we do with that filter? So right now, unfortunately, it's considered to be a solid waste, and that goes to the landfill. Hopefully that is a designed landfill that has, a leachate collection like someone had talked about. At least we know that it's getting concentrated into that leachate instead of being released straight to the groundwater. But the problem is now what do you do with it when it's in the leachate? So we got to stop that cycle, right? And if we would have stopped the importation at the time that we banned the production, that would have gone a really far way.
Hey, Mark, maybe you can comment on this, and I kind of hope to sort of put people's mind at ease a little tiny bit and not confuse things even more, but that the private wells study that looked at 400 and however many wells did show the ubiquity of this stuff with the 71%, but you can clarify this for me. The vast majority of that 71% were extremely low levels. Yep, they were detectable, but they were very, very low and kind of at levels that the jury is still out on the health impacts. There were, out of that, were there five that required follow-up? Three that required follow-up?
Oneida County, Rock, and Walworth, I think. And so unfortunately, the well that was collected in the town of Stella was one of those three. And unfortunate for the residents of the town of Stella, the private well concentrations that have been detected in Stella are among some of the highest in the nation.
My question is, drinking water, do you use a particular type of filter, or what filtering system level of, quality do you recommend for addressing the problem?
Yeah, great question. So there's 3 technologies that can be applicable for removal of PFAS in drinking water. That's ion exchange, reverse osmosis, and granulated activated charcoal. I can speak from just a little bit experience from working with, I've been the DG lead for the town of Stella for greater than 2 years, working hand in hand with the public. We have had success at removing some rather high levels of PFAS in groundwater or private wells using treatment. And one of those 3 technologies will be applicable. It would be what's your incoming concentrations, and then working with the treatment company to look at what best technology. Iron will tend to interfere with some removal technologies, and unfortunately for northern Wisconsin, we've got a lot of iron. And so it just because of our mafic rock nature, right, we're basically glacial outwash of the igneous, bedrock in Canada, right? And so when you put our aggressive water in contact with it, it wants to dissolve something, and so we get a lot of iron and manganese. And so that can interfere. So it's looking at taking some additional water quality samples to be able to determine what would be the best technology for the water quality that you have. But in particular, those 3 technologies have been effective at removing PFAS from drinking water. Of course, I would say that the best way to eliminate, to have PFAS in your drinking water is to put in a safe source. Drill a well that doesn't have PFAS. And the reason I say that is because treatment has to be maintained. And people are really good at that up front, but after like 6 months, 7 months, a year, they kind of forget about that. And so you'll get breakthrough in a treatment if it's not properly applied, and then you'll be exposed to PFAS again. So the best thing that you can do is eliminate it from the source. So find and that's not, so even in Starks, where we have gross contamination, we've been able to put in wells that have been no detect for PFAS, utilizing the American Restoration Plan Act grant money.
Hi. Wondering, are there test kits available for the public to purchase to make those determinations?
So again, if you go on to dnr.wi.gov, that's just the landing page for the DNR, and you type in PFAS, that will bring up a series of drawdown menus. On your left-hand side, you'll see a click button, an activation button that says Labs Certified for PFAS Testing in the state of Wisconsin. And so if you go onto that link, you'll see that there's quite a few labs that are certified to be able to do PFAS testing in the state of Wisconsin. It's a somewhat expensive test compared to some of the other water quality tests that are done. $350 to $400.
Hi, I live on French Island in the town of Campbell. And so that's an area where we have an airport, and so we have lots of contamination. And we all have groundwater, our own wells. And so we're looking at options to deal with that, like maybe going into a deeper aquifer. But my question is, when they do the testing as a geologist, and I'm curious about cycles over the year. So you can test the same well at one part of the year, and the concentrations of PFAS that are in there are drastically different than at a different time of year. And that might be more unique to our particular aquifer, being so close to the Mississippi River. But I'm curious if there's other research out there looking at cycles in terms of the aquifers.
So just from my personal experience, what you're seeing is seasonal fluctuation of groundwater flow direction based on spring melt, which creates mounding, and that can change the direction. So at certain points, you're directly down gradient from the source, and at other times, you're side gradient likely. And so that's why you're seeing it. And also, so people are aware, I always explain, Wausau every year has a 10,000 rubber ducky charity, and they put your little number on it, and then you can see them released, and you can walk along River Park, whatever it is, and you can see your rubber ducky and see if you're going to be number one. That duck will travel at like 10 to 15 feet per second. in the stream. An individual water molecule that's trying to move through soil matrix can only pass through the point where the matrix meet each other and create a space. It's called effective porosity. And so it cannot travel nearly as quick as what it can in the surface. And so what I'm trying to point out is while it's slower than what it is for surface water, groundwater still moves. And so it's much slower. If I would do an average Darcyan flow velocity for the average outwash here, it'd probably be between 50 to 150 feet per year. That's what groundwater would move in this vicinity, likely. And that's because we have such a flat area that there's nothing to push it. We have no elevation in which you can get a head to push it. We're all, if you think about it, we got 400 and some lakes in Oneida County. It's pretty flat. So, so that's why I think that you're probably seeing the fluctuations. This is the change in groundwater flow direction because of the change in the dynamics of the river. That's pretty common that you can see it in a river. I would say, you know, they can pack off that borehole so they can put in an inflatable bladder so that they can ensure that they're strategically sampling from, you know, strategic intervals throughout that aquifer. So they will be testing at intervals up and down that to assure that they get into PFAS-free water.
Just a quick question that maybe our last question alluded to. So the deeper the well is, the better situation for PFAS, or not necessarily, or how does that work?
Yeah, so these have been in use since the 40s, 50s, 60s. It really depends upon when it was used, how much it was used, and then what's the particular aquifer, because there's going to be some that are going to be at much more risk. So that's a really hard question to answer because it would be really more site specific. You got to look at what's the matrix that you're looking at. So, for instance, in northeast Wisconsin, when you would get in karstic situations, it's not going to last very long. It's going to move. It's going to be gone. You get into a fracture in an igneous bedrock in northern Wisconsin, it could be there for thousands of years. So it really would depend upon the site specificness. I can't say for certain. I can say in Stella, just my experience there, the deeper that we've been going into the bedrock and avoiding the fractures, we've been having better luck at avoiding the PFAS. But that's specific to that site.
My question is, so, okay, say you buy the test kit and test your well and your water, and it does come up positive for PFAS, what can you do then? Is there any option, or is the only option to drill a new well, or what are you supposed to do? Is there anything to like fix that?
First and foremost, send me the result. Because what I can do for you at that point is supply emergency temporary water, drinking water for you under NR 738. But it has to be over DHS health recommendation. That's the biggest thing. We will support anybody that has a PFAS problem. So we have hydrogeologists in central office that would look at a site-specific analysis of your location and try to see, yes, we would try first to see if we could drill a well to get out of it. And if we couldn't do that, then we would look at treatment.
There's nothing you can do, like you can't put anything into the well to like fix it? Can you repeat that?
She is asking if you have a detect of PFAS in your well, can you put something in the well to try to eliminate the PFAS? There might be some treatment systems that they've devised that they can put down well. Most of the treatment systems that I know that are accessible, reverse osmosis, ion exchange, and GAC, are all after the fact. So it's pumped up by your submersible, pumped to your pressure tank, and then the treatment is put on post-pressure tank, and that's treated. I will say that DHS has indicated that PFAS is not really passing the skin barrier. So if someone has PFAS in their well, they still can do their laundry, they can still wash their dishes, etc. Really, the exposure comes from production of high water foods such as Jell-O, oatmeal, soups, or from drinking water consumption. So what we tell folks, if they have contamination in their private well, that they would use what we call point of use treatment instead of point of entry. There's no need from an economic standpoint, unless you're concerned about it, to treat all of the water that's coming into your house. You use that water that you're using for your consumption and food prep. That would drastically reduce your costs for having, to eliminate that PFAS issue. So yeah, there's some things that we can do to try to help with that.
So like RT, I want to give people a little bit of hope here. The DNR has tested all of our municipal water systems, and we know where the problems are: Eau Claire, Rhinelander, French Island, Madison. But the vast majority of our drinking water from municipal systems is safe, which means our beer at Rocky Reef is safe to drink.
So I will comment on that, and I want to give the state of Wisconsin kudos. The state of Wisconsin went through an administrative rule process to produce an MCL for PFAS that was not supported or following the federal government, and that's huge. And I want to point out that the reason, or what comes from that is that we now have a full inventory of public water systems in the state and what their status is with PFAS. We now have bill money for still 2 more years, but we had already started this when we got the inventory in 2023. We are targeting those systems that we know that have PFAS issues and are providing them the mechanism to get funding to remediate that issue. And so there are many other states that have no clue if their public water systems have PFAS or not. We already have a full inventory, and we're utilizing money that's available to us to try to remedy that issue. And so in the state of Wisconsin, there's approximately 90 public water systems that are over the current DHS recommended health guidelines, and we have been working with them directly to get funding and to remediate that issue before our new PFAS standard of 4 comes in through the administrative rule process. So state of Wisconsin on its own has been ahead of what the feds have been doing, and you should be pleased for that. I mean, it's a big move, especially in this political environment.
As I understand with RO systems, there's different UL listings and ratings for what takes them out. The average consumer, it seems kind of hard to tell what the difference is. And you talked before about stopping the cycle. Well, with an RO system, you're flushing the bad contaminants right back in your septic system, right back into your well. How do you break that if that's what you're going to do to remediate?
You won't be able to. So it would have to be that backwash water then was treated with some other additional, and they do. So there are plenty of companies when they install GAC filtration that they then have, or reverse osmosis, that they then treat GAC on the backwash water. That is the problem. We talked about that a little bit. PFAS has got a cycle. We got to try to break that cycle. Right now, if it's attached to a medium, it's considered a solid waste that goes to a landfill. So yes, in the governor's announcement on February 4th, he's talking about trying to find ways that we can deal with that are destructive and so that we can break that PFAS cycle. But you're correct. The other thing with reverse osmosis I will mention is that they are somewhat inefficient because about 25% of the production of a well is used just for backwash. So from that standpoint, but GAC filtration, the filters and ion exchange can be expensive. And so it all depends upon what's your flow through. If you're a single person and you're using, say, 1,000 gallons of water a week, or if you're a family of 6 and you have 4 teenagers and the washer never stops. It's just amazing. It never stops, right? That you'd have to look at all of that. And the water treatment companies are savvy about that. They understand, they all want to be the seller of that unit to you. So they'll look at what your situation and try to that. But you're exactly right. That's one of our issues that we have to deal with. But at least you're not drinking the PFAS that's been removed. But yeah, it's going to be somebody else's problem potentially.
Most of us in this room probably are on private wells and in the whole area around here. What's the prognosis for those at this point?
So the prevalence study indicated that if you're in an area that's non-industrialized or not adjacent to agricultural land, your likelihood is that you're probably very little or have no PFAS impacts. But 71% of the private wells did, and that's because they were in rural areas and they were impacted by their neighbors' privately owned wastewater treatment system because materials that they used in their residence are not removed and it went into the aquifer and you're down gradient. So the answer is, if you don't want to be grossly contaminated, don't be close to an agricultural field. And if you want it to be less contaminated, you'll be in an urban area. I think you look at what your recharge area is. So for instance, if you know, for instance, you're living next to a stream, typically, surface water and groundwater, at least the water table will follow the same flow pattern. Look at what's been used up gradient of your, what's the land use that surrounds you. That's what's going to determine what your true risk is going to be. If it's going to be stayed, if it's county forest that's only been in forest generation, they've not used any chemicals, they use rotational harvest, probably zero, besides what we could see from some airborne deposition. So we were talking at dinner tonight, again, I mentioned about Lake Superior and the rainbow smelt. So even the word is ubiquitous. And so from low levels, just about everywhere you look, you're going to see PFAS.
That brings me to an online question. Are PFAS in all groundwater, and will they affect artesian wells?
So no, it's not in all groundwater, thank God. I think it's where the land use has had where PFAS has been deposited, or if they've used it in some process, or if it's agriculture and it's been part of a process. Again, you'd have to look at what the recharge water is. So artesian works by pressure. And so typically it's the recharge areas at higher elevation. What I always talk about artesian wells with folks, if I was to take a straight glass tube and I was to bend that into a U, and the city is down here and the mountains are up here and the recharge occurs from the water up here, if you take a glass tube and you pour water in it, it will form an equal height at both sides of that glass tube, right? But if the city's elevation is lower than what the height is of that glass tube, that's when you have that artesian condition. So we see a lot of them along Lake Superior because the high part of the watershed is at a much higher elevation. And then when you get down along the lake, one of the most famous would be at Maslowski Beach in Ashland. I think that it's been on about 50 national shows, and anytime I'm up in Ashland, there's a line. It's amazing. And so for some reason, and I don't understand it besides maybe some people think that could be older legacy water, which would have less chance to be contaminated because it's been in the ground longer. It really depends upon what's the flow pattern for that. It could be that the residency time is 6 months or 3 months versus thousands of years. And so it could impact artesian wells. And I'll speak for the Crescent Spring in Rhinelander, which has been impacted by perfluorohexane sulfonic acid, and that's one PFAS compound. The amount of people that used that spring was just incredible. Even though it's posted for PFAS, there's still lines. And people have some understanding that there's some specialness to water that comes from an aquifer that's older, and I'm going to be frank, sometimes the older water is, the nastier it is because it has more time. Water is the universal solvent, right? The more time that it has in contact with things, it's going to dissolve it. And particularly up here in northern Wisconsin, we have no buffering capacity. So we talked about it, that all of our sand and gravel is igneous rock that got ground up that was Precambrian from Canada. That water, when it gets down here, has no buffering capacity. That pH is so acidic when it comes into contact with that glacial matrix, it strips whatever it gets into contact with. Again, that's why we have such high iron and manganese up here. It's truly one of our worst water quality problems, actually, for northern Wisconsin. And I'll be, being a public water system supervisor, if somebody happens to get iron bacteria in their well, you will never stop. You will only be able to maintain it. You will never get rid of it, and it will be the worst thing that will ever happen to you. It clogs up everything. It stains everything. It's incredible. So I don't understand sometimes the thought that spring water is like this special, I don't know. Yeah, it's neat. I get it, but Well, that's the other, right? You get a sulfur bacteria. Ooh. Typically, though, you have to have reducing conditions for them to survive, and so that, you're probably next to a wetland. So problems with wetlands is they're great for buffering capacity for water, but they also contain a high amount of organic matter, which then robs the oxygen, which produces reducing conditions, which then actually increases the solubility of heavy metals. So,
Could you comment on firefighting foam exposure as well as nonstick cooking spray? If those.
So the aqueous firefighting foam was one of the first uses of PFAS, and it's very good at what it does. Most of the sites that we have known contamination in the state of Wisconsin are associated with mitigation of airplane fires. So we have a person here that just talked about that they're from French Island, town of Campbell, Eau Claire, La Crosse, Madison, Truax Field. A large majority of the PFAS problems that we have arose from the use of aqueous firefighting foam.
Sorry to jump in, is that used in wildfire?
No, so it's a different as Class B foam. I think that if I remember this, and I'm sorry, I might not have this right. I believe it's Class A. That's the PFAS, and Class B is what they would use for firefighting. So no, and the reason is because the material that's burning is different. So it's you're burning an organic solvent that's volatilizing, and it's so volatile that you've got to find a way to sniff that right. You're not going to be able to put a surfactant onto a tree fire because you can't get that blanket right. You know what I'm saying? So it's very interesting that the manufacturer of PFAS actually handed this out to a lot of rural fire departments to see if they could use it. And it actually does work on house fires. It does help a little bit with putting out fires, but I think the environmental damage that it causes is worse. The governor did pass, when he did the PFAS action plan, passed an executive order in which the non-used Class A foam was collected in the state of Wisconsin. I can't remember, it was thousands of gallons that was collected from all the voluntary fire departments that had it, et cetera, that had it stored. So that's one thing that's one of the only things that we've been able to do in the state of Wisconsin to be proactive.
Hello. You say that the PFAS is ubiquitous, so we've all been exposed to it, and there's a number of elder people in the audience, including myself. How much of it would it occur in us that we would see any kind of a consequence, and how concerned do we need to be about it if we're an elder person versus if we have young people?
I'm not a health expert, not a toxicologist. The only thing I can comment on is that greater than 90% of Americans have detectable levels of PFAS in their blood. That's how ubiquitous it is, so it's everywhere. To speak for the toxicology and the effects on younger and older people, I simply can't speak for that. I don't have the expertise. That would be a DHS question.
How much, if any, of your funding comes from the federal government, and if you do get money from the federal government, are you concerned about that being cut?
That's a hot question. We do get some program revenue through our water use program and through our private well program for well notifications. I can't tell you exactly. I would say at least probably 70% of our drinking water budget comes through federal funding. I think that we're just going to have to wait and see where the dust settles, and see where it goes. The thing that I have, just personally now, I can't speak for the department, just what I'm reading is that he's kind of after more of the green energy and climate resilience, climate change, global warming, those type of things. I would say, and this is, I talked at dinner, I hope, this is just one of the reasons that I got into drinking water is that we get a little gold shield because we're public health. that's the only thing I can say that I'm hoping is that maybe our little gold shield might, might help. Well, I really can't be a prognosticator on that. I can tell you that as management, we tell all of our folks that you really can only worry about what you can control. It's good to stay informed and understand what's going on, but don't get bent out of shape about what you can't control. Let's keep focused on what our objectives are for the DG program, and that's protecting public health, and that's what we'll continue to do. So we can't.
Yeah. Do you think consumer level labeling of products for PFAS, like warning labels, would be effective? And is there anything like that in motion that we could contribute to?
I don't know if there's anything in motion in that, but I think that anything that we can do to try to get the word out, I think sure, why not? I mean, if it's causing health issues, look at what we did with cigarettes, or all of the other things that people were using consumers. If we haven't banned the sale of it, sure, I think that would be great if we could get some type of warning on it that says, hey, use of this product, could cause you, adverse health effects. So I think that would be more of like a, consumer protection type issue.
You had mentioned that agricultural land is a producer of PFAS, and I'm just curious what it is on in agricultural land that would promote that. And then also, if we were to get testing done, would you get that information, or would we have to send that to you directly for our own wells?
You'd have to, if you are doing the testing yourself, you'd have to provide that to me. If you saw the ad for this, my name's Mark Pauli. If you go on to the staff directory, just on the DNR webpage, and type in my last name, you'll get my contact information, and then I would be able to work with you to figure out what your situation is, and if you're over the recommended health standards, we'll at least get you emergency temporary drinking water. And then talk about February 3rd, they put another $5 million allocation into the ARPA well compensation program, which is a great program for the state of Wisconsin, in which private wells that are affected have the opportunity to, if they're eligible, to get funding to a certain extent to pay for replacement of wells.
And the other part about agricultural fields, what is it about that promotes that?
Well, this study, just the results of the study indicated that apparently the use, and recently the EPA put out a risk assessment, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, about the use of biosolids. So amending of agricultural fields with municipal sewer sludge or septic hauling waste or industrial biosolids, or even the latest research that I have been doing, they tested the 10 most common configurations of pesticides and herbicides. And interesting enough, they weren't required to be put on the label until 2021 because they were considered to be inert ingredients. And those analysis showed that some of the PFAS were at levels of parts per million. So if we start talking about that again and go back to nanograms per liter, that's 10 to the 6th greater concentration. And if that's applied to a field yearly for decades, PFAS doesn't break down. It's going to accumulate. And so it's the amending or the application of materials to soil. And that doesn't mean that if someone's a residential owner that's really anal about their lawn and they're putting Roundup on and et cetera, or using septic sludge or using a composting agent that has PFAS in it. So this is not just limited to agricultural land. We've seen issues and impacts from residential land use, what the residential land users are doing also. But the PFAS study, the prevalence study, which is not the cure-all or all of it, it really points towards agricultural land amendments being one of those things that we need to be more concerned about, in particular now with the information that the EPA has put about the risk assessment of biosolids indicating that it's a big risk.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mark Pauli, for informing us on this. Thank you. Thanks to everybody who participated tonight and to our sponsors, the Lakeland chapter of the UW Alumni Association, Rocky Reef Brewing, Minocqua Public Library, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, UW Trout Lake Station, WXPR Radio, and the Brittingham Foundation. We hope to see you back here next month, March 6th, for Dr. Grace Wilkinson speaking about harmful algal blooms. And you can stay informed through our email list or our website for more information on that event. If you want to sign up for email reminders, you can do that on a sheet back here or through our website, scienceontapminocqua.org, and click Contact Us and leave your email address. We'll see you next month.